Welcome to a solo episode of the Refined Strength podcast. So, I had a little scheduling mishap with a guest that I had on for today. And while she's still going to be on later, I wanted to take this opportunity where I was in my podcast chair and ready to podcast for a solo cast. So, on this episode, I really wanted to speak to the competitor and talk about the off season and keeping the fire lit, so to speak, in the off season, because right now it is January, February, around the time you guys are listening. And anyone who's a competitor right now is either actively in prep, right? They are getting ready for springtime shows, maybe the summer run of national shows like Junior USAs, Junior Nationals, Universe, USAs, all of those, and or you're in your off season, and maybe that off season is just almost wrapping up, and you're going to compete towards the end of the year, or maybe you're heading into an entire year off or more because you really need to grow. Oftentimes, most people need to grow, and especially as a new competitor, that time it's going to need to be extended. You can't just take 6 months off between preps and think that that's enough time to put quality muscle tissue on, but also put quality muscle tissue on that you can then maintain throughout the next prep, because losing muscle in prep is also a thing. So anyone who's in off season right now or struggling to just consider their off season being as long as it might have to be, whether their coach is telling them or whether you need to take more time to financially be able to compete, because competing is an expensive sport. I find that a lot of people have trouble with the thought of staying a bodybuilder in their off season, because so many newer competitors think that bodybuilding is just about competing, but really it's the opposite. Bodybuilding is mostly about the building. That's literally why it's called bodybuilding. And so while yes, we usually get inspired or just drawn to the sport because of things like seeing people on show day, seeing wins, seeing trophies, seeing pro cards, all of the things, the foundation of those things that you see that draws you to the sport is the off season, and a quality off season at that. And we can't have a quality off season and hope that it's going to produce a quality prep if we're not putting quality efforts and intention into that off season. If we're constantly living either in the past where, oh, I miss the shreds, I miss being in prep, I miss, competing, all of the things, or if you're constantly living in the future, I can't wait to prep. When can I prep? Can we start prep early? Can we do these shows when we're really not ready? You miss out on a lot of the quality that can come from being present in the off season. When you're present, you are so much more able to focus on the things that you need to focus on in order to have that quality off season. And some of those things I'll talk about. So the biggest thing, obviously, is training. You have to be focused in your training. And training, in order for an athlete to not only get what they need out of the training from a muscle tissue standpoint, but also from just a recovery standpoint and avoiding injuries, it should be periodized. So how I like to do it for my athletes is I like to look at the off season in a series of phases. So when someone steps off stage, they're really excited, they're ready to grow, they're ready to go, but they have to focus on the reverse diet first. The reverse diet, while yes, it feels like, and there might be a lot of kind of bro science out there that says that that's like the most anabolic period, so you should go really hard as soon as you're done competing. Keep in mind, especially as a female, if you're a female listening to this, but even men too, your body is in a really fragile state, actually, when you're coming off of a show. It's fragile because it's very low body fat, and with extreme levels of low body fat, you also have less joint fluid. You have less cushioning for your bones and your joints and your tendons, ligaments. Everything is a lot drier, and it's just your body is not ready to handle true off-season loads. So in order to prepare for the off-season, we have to have a really solid reverse diet. And that reverse diet can also be thought of as a health focused phase. So in order to get the most out of your reverse diet, you want to basically treat it as an extension of prep. So everything that made you really successful in prep, that should be continued into your reverse diet. So prepping your food, grocery delivery, grocery pickup, anything that helped you get all of your things done when you had limited time because of cardio and wanting to get sleep. Prioritizing sleep is a big one. Prioritizing getting all of your health supplements in. If you're an enhanced athlete in prep, your coach should have a solid breakdown of just how we're going to focus more on health and get you back to a normal, functioning, natural, healthy level when it comes to hormones and things like that post show. So you have to think about all of those things. And the best way to do that and ensure that health happens and improves throughout your reverse diet is to keep all of those habits. Same thing with cardio. I'm not someone who likes to drastically reduce cardio first thing coming out of a prep, because going from, say, we're doing 6 days a week of cardio at like 300 calories or more, then down to 0 or only like 3 times a week, that's a big shock to the body. And in order to maintain a level of leanness, but also keep you from overextending yourself and overexerting yourself when you're in that fragile state, I like to kind of find a sweet spot for that person and also get their feedback and see how they feel. I like to look at whatever their biofeedback markers are and their recovery feedback. So how inflamed they are, if they are dealing with any injuries towards the end of prep, because honestly, that's pretty common. Anything nagging like a hip strain or knee issues or whatever it is, bringing cardio down to a moderate level and then slowly bringing it down from there, but keeping some level of cardio in, at least in the first part of their off season, to just help support a healthy and aesthetic body composition. Because even though internal health is of the utmost importance and it's the priority, we also want to make sure that we like how we look, because as a bodybuilder we work too hard to hate how we look. And so that's how the intention should start when you're focusing on your reverse diet and going into your off season and living through the off season, is not treating it as a time to be off, treating it as a time to be just as focused as you were in prep, just a different type of focus. So I have a goal specifically of staying and maintaining a little bit leaner than I did in my previous off season, but that doesn't mean I want to stay contest prep lean. So have a happy medium. And for me, that means I'm keeping in some cardio. I'll probably keep my steps up throughout the majority of my off season, whether I'm doing cardio or not. So treating the reverse diet as an extension of prep, but also a prep for the off season. So in that reverse diet, you're focused on your internal health. You're not training too intensely. You're probably training at like 8 or so RPE or 2 or 3 RIR, especially as a female, where we really want to bring hormonal function back online. Part of that is just reducing overall allostatic load, right? So cardio is coming down, food is slowly going up, and that food comes up to support recovery, support hormone function, support your brain as well, your brain function, your cardio function, all of your function overall. And if we can stick to the diet as closely as possible, maybe doing a free meal per week, then by the end of the 10 to 12 week reverse diet post show, if you stuck to it at least 80% of the time, your body composition, your mental health, your physical health, it's all going to be in such a better place than if you were to say totally fucked off in your reverse diet and been off plan for the majority of the time, or at least 50% of the time. Because when we overeat post show, while it's something that a lot of people just can't or have trouble with controlling, it's not only something that can impact hormones negatively, but it can also impact your gut negatively. Because think about everything you ate in your prep, and then if you go do a total 180 with that in your first few weeks post show, Your gut is not used to eating all of the foods that you're eating now, like burgers and pizza and all of the junk that you couldn't have in prep, that you were depriving yourself from. So making decisions about food and learning to have just a healthier relationship with food is a huge important part of that reverse diet, and carrying that into the off season. No, there's nothing wrong with a free meal here and there, or some flexibility, some even intuitive days, but making sure all of the decisions you make about food is very much rooted in, how do I want to feel? How do I want to digest this? How do I think I'm going to digest this meal that I'm thinking about eating? How do I feel like I'm going to feel the next morning? Or how is this going to impact my training, my sleep, my overall function, how I feel like bloating wise? Like, is it really worth it to eat a food that's going to make you feel like shit? Probably not. But when we're finished with a prep, we often have trouble really focusing on that type of decision. So, but the more practice you make and the more times you ask yourself that question, is this food or is this meal or this behavior going to help me, or is this going to hurt me? Is this going to bring me farther to my goals or closer to my goals, or is it going to bring me farther from my goals? Those questions, even though we won't always answer them in a way that serves us and serves our goals, sometimes you might say like, nope, it's going to make me feel like shit, but I don't care. I'm going to eat that thing, or I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to have that drink. That's okay, because at the end of the day, you're an adult. You should be able to do whatever you want, but you should also be able to feel however you want. And if you want to feel good every day or the majority of the time, you have to back that up with your actions, just like you did in prep. If you want to win on stage, you have to back that up with nailing your plan every single day. So if you want to look good and feel good in your off season, you have to back that up with actions and behaviors and thoughts that support it. So the off season is also, just like the reverse is a prep for the off season is a prep for your next prep. So that's another thing in terms of staying focused and actually doing the job you're meant to do in the off season, which for most people is to build more muscle. So we want to build more muscle so we can be unrecognizable on stage. We can be undeniable. We worked on all of the weak points that judges gave you feedback for, as well as things like posing and, you're maybe saving for a better suit or whatever it is. You want to really do the work in the off season. And that means training like you've never trained before. And in a few episodes with various guests, we've talked about training intensity, like the one with Liana recently. Most people don't really know what true failure training is. And something I talk to my clients about when I watch a training video back and I see that it was too easy. Like, on their program, it says to failure, 10 out of 10 RPE. And I know that wasn't failure because they got off of that way too easily, right? Or they were in that set and they were like looking around and not really focused, like looking at the mirror, checking if they're in frame still, even though the phone didn't move. Like, there's all these things that's drawing their attention away from the task at hand. So to really train like you're building, in order to build muscle, in order to get something that you don't currently have, that means you have to train like you've never trained before. So really, whatever works for you, whether it's that gun to the head mentality, or for me, I like to think of like this, what if this was my last chance at adding quad tissue? Like, what if it was my last time I got to do leg extensions or hack squats or whatever it is I'm doing? I want to do it. And so I can look back and say, like, I did my very best. I know I didn't leave anything on the table. Or I know that I did that exactly as programmed if it wasn't a failure set, right? So really thinking about it like it's your last chance, or gun to the head. Like, if a gun was to your head, would you go for more reps if they told you to, right? Another thing I like to say too is just to think less. When you're in a set, and if you're thinking a lot, if you're having a lot of thoughts just racing through your mind about like, okay, I think I can do 3 more. Or, okay, I think I can do 2 more. Oh my God, what's that over there? Or my toe hurts, my knee hurts, whatever. We have all these thoughts that race in our heads that we can't necessarily quiet some of the time. But if you can learn to quiet the thoughts as much as possible and just focus on the task at hand, one thing you can also do is not decide with your head that you're at failure, because that's not what failure is. Real failure is when your body decides. It's muscular failure. It's mechanical failure. So what I would recommend is when you're in a set that's supposed to be to failure, just take a deep breath before you start that set, and take even a deep breath maybe before some of the reps if it's hard, but you know you can do more. And the moment you tell yourself this is failure, that's when you have to do another rep and see if you were wrong. If you were wrong, then you were wrong, and you can go for another one probably. And you can keep going until you actually fail. Failure isn't in the mind, it's in the body. So don't think about, oh, this is failure. Just let your body decide, and just keep asking yourself, well, what if I did one more? What if I tried for one more, and keep going until you actually hit failure? So that's the training portion. Another part of being focused in the off season is obviously nutrition. We kind of talked about that, but a big thing about nutrition that I think a lot of people miss is just the food entitlement that people have when they come into an off season, especially if they need to grow, is like, well, I have to take like a huge crazy cheat meal or a free meal or whatever, every single week, or the weight drops too much for a guy, especially this happens. And so they'll like go off and have another cheat meal. Sometimes that's warranted. Sometimes it can be helpful. But when you do that too often, it can end up leading you to a place of just like not being able to see the muscle that you're building as much because you've gained a little bit too much fat. And this is more common for females, but sometimes when we overshoot body fat in an off season, then that's when people want to do a mini cut in the middle of their off season or do a cleanup phase or something like that. And while I'm not against these things, like I've definitely done them for clients, I've done them in my own past in off season. If we can spend no time in a deficit during an off season, that's going to help us so much in terms of our metabolic function and our capacity to really nail the prep when the prep starts. So that means not doing mini cuts. And that means when you do get uncomfortable in an off season with body fat, instead of thinking like, oh, I need a mini cut, or, oh, I need to do a quick diet or something like that, think first on like, well, are you even nailing your variables now? So, because if you can't nail your off-season variables, like your macros, your meal plan, your training, your cardio or your steps, but also water intake, health supplements, things like that, then why do you think a mini cut is the best option? Most people will actually start to see some body recomposition happen. So either gaining muscle and losing fat, or just gaining muscle and having that redistribute how fat looks on their body if they start nailing their variables a little bit more. And what happens with that is like often insulin sensitivity improves, right? Our health improves, like our skin improves. You start having better energy. Your cardio improves because you're actually getting your steps. Your sleep might improve because you're eating less junk. Just all sorts of things can improve. And while the scale might not go down, it also might, but it might not go down if you start to feel better and look better and just get into a better headspace in terms of your body's your relationship with your body, but also your relationship with food and what food is meant to do to you. Then you probably don't end up needing the mini cut. But I think there are applications for small deficits, whether in an off season, especially if it's a really long off season. If we do really overshoot body fat and we don't want to lose all of that body fat in a single prep, sometimes I'll split preps up into like an initial cleanup phase, then spend some time in maintenance, and then start the actual prep once we are ready, if we are ready and we don't want to go into more of just like a continued off season at that point. So focus on nutrition, focus on training, focus also on mindset and what your mindset needs to improve on in this off season to make your prep better, but also just to make your life better, because we shouldn't just be focused on prep and just be focused on the life of a bodybuilder, because we're a lot more than that. And I'll go more into that in a little bit. But really do some reflecting on who you are as a person and what in your life maybe got put a little bit on the back burner during prep. So sometimes people put in a little less effort at work or a little less effort in their business if they're an entrepreneur. they'll put less effort sometimes, or just kind of let things go a little bit in a relationship or friendships. You're typically spending a little bit less time going to social events and things like that when you're in prep. So off season, while it's not the time to just all of a sudden say yes to everything, because you're gonna overextend yourself and burn yourself out on that real quick if you do that. But really, like, considering where it's best to spend your energy. Where is it going to be the most productive? How are you going to feel if you get to work more on a project at work that you weren't able to handle before? How is it going to feel when you can like spend more quality time with your loved ones, like your spouse or your best friends or your family or something like that? That doesn't have to be so controlled by bodybuilding and your prep and things like that. So really looking at some of the life gains that you can make in an off season, because even though, yes, you can totally make life gains in a prep, it's just a little harder and it takes a little bit more finessing and time management and things like that. And it also takes practice, which you should be doing in your off season. So examples of life gains that I've focused on making in my off season that I knew would make my next prep better, in addition to making my life better, would be like buying this house. I bought this house just over a year ago. In the last year of my off season, I bought it in 2023. So 2023, I had already been a self-employed person, a coach, for more than 2 years. So I was able to qualify for a loan as a self-employed person. And I was able to buy this house all by myself. And that was a really, really good feeling. It was a great accomplishment because in my mind, like that was one of my big goals. I had never owned a house before with anyone or by myself. And so especially coming from a place of never feeling like I would be able to do that alone, and then getting to a place where I had built myself up enough so that not only I could afford it, but I could just handle it mentally and handle the financial side of my business mentally. That was a really big win for me. And it gave me the flexibility that I had during this prep to, not deal with living in an apartment. I had an extra room for my Peloton. I had my office. My partner, Austin, has his office. And we had a great kitchen and just like a really good, solid place that I could have as my home and decorate however I want to and just really cultivate the vibe in here and make it like perfectly conducive to my way of life in season or off season. And so being that I didn't have to like move in the middle of my prep, that was a big one. My last prep in 2021, I actually did have to move, or I made the decision to move, and I moved across the country in the middle of prep. It was not ideal. It just didn't work out super well. It was really stressful. It was a lot of financial burden on me, and I learned a lot through that process. In hindsight, I should have just stopped the prep after the first show or not even started that prep at all. But I didn't, and I made those mistakes, and now I'm learning, or I've learned from them, and I'm imparting them to others like clients and on this podcast. But being able to be settled in your environment, both mentally and physically, before starting a prep is a really, really awesome thing. And it's like, if we can control that, I would highly recommend it. So being settled in your environment, also looking at your relationships. So what about your relationships maybe made your prep harder that you need to now work on in your off season now that you have a little bit of mental capacity back? Unfortunately, a lot of the time in bodybuilding, when someone gets into competing and their significant other or partner is not into it, there's a sense of a disconnect, obviously, because you're living very different lifestyles, especially if the person not competing is far to the extreme of just not taking care of themselves. That can be really hard to really coexist in a relationship, especially if you live together. Oftentimes the person not in prep feels neglected, or they feel like you can't ever do anything fun. And so there's lots of just like conflict often. And so when you're in your off season and you are able to be a little bit more balanced, really take inventory of like who in your life is conducive and like really gives you back just as much as you give them, and who in your life doesn't do that. Who in your life makes you feel drained when you're done being with them? Who makes you feel like you're walking on eggshells, or like you always have to be someone different than who you really feel like you are? If there's people in your life that are like solid in your life, they should be people that give you energy when you're with them and after you're with them. They should be people that support you, not just with their words, but with their actions, and that you want to do the same to them. But if the people in your life, some of them or all of them, are not that way, don't be afraid to like work themselves out. Like, let them work themselves out while you focus on the things that you are building for your life and your happiness and contentment and fulfillment. Which brings me to other life gains, is like, what goals do you have outside of bodybuilding? Working on other goals outside of bodybuilding is a really important part of being a good bodybuilder, because there has to be life after bodybuilding. You might be a really elite level bodybuilder, like an IFBB pro who is winning pro shows at the Olympia, right? But if you don't have other things in your life that support you, even if they're related to bodybuilding, but something that does not have to depend on you competing, you're gonna one day be met with this wake up call of like, what did I do with my life? Why do I have a sense of like emptiness now that I'm done competing? Because sooner or later, you're gonna have to be done competing. You're not gonna be competing forever, even if even though there's master's classes of every level, right? There has to be other life outside of bodybuilding. And I think if you can start that at a young age of a bodybuilder, you're going to be so much better off and be so much more a whole person. Because while, yes, bodybuilding is important to you and it's a big part of what you do and who you are, me as a coach, bodybuilding is a big part of my life, right? As a competitor and as a coach, and as a friend of mostly competitors. But having parts of you that don't have anything to do with bodybuilding really allows you to respect yourself more, and it allows you to respect bodybuilding even more, and I think get more out of it. I was able to, work towards building my business before I started my prep. And then I was able to expand my business greatly during my prep. And that wasn't because I'm a bodybuilder. That was because I'm a good business owner and I'm a good coach. And no, I don't have to be a good bodybuilder in order to be those things. But I really focused on being those things before I started prep, and every day trying to improve and do things that made me into that person, so that when it came time to prep and my capacity for some stuff did drop a little bit, I wasn't having to like force myself to be a good business owner or force myself to be a good coach. I just did it because it's my job. I just did it because it's what I wake up and do. It's second nature to me. And I wouldn't have that, and I wouldn't have had the success I did as a coach or a business owner with adding 2 coaches, adding an assistant, starting this podcast. I wouldn't have that if I didn't do all of the setup and alignment work before the prep started. And I'm not saying that to like toot my own horn or anything, but like, I'm pretty fucking proud of what I've done. So that's why I mentioned that. I see it a lot in other people as well, like Jess Best, for an example, just that because she's a coach on my team, is during all of the last year in 2024, she was in prep too. And she made a pretty big life change in terms of switching to a new team as a coach and bringing all of her clients over to Refine Strength the way she did. So just an example is like, you can grow your business and you can grow yourself internally through a prep, even if everybody around you isn't doing that. Even if they say that like, oh, you have to focus on prep, you have to be all prep and nothing else. And, you just have to be just locked in, blinders on, nothing else matters. But that's not really realistic, because the world of bodybuilding is like a super, super small space. When you really look outside of the world, nobody outside of bodybuilding knows or really cares about bodybuilding. So you got to be able to pay your bills. You got to be able to show up for the people that care about you and show up for you. You got to be able to have something that you can identify with, right? So one thing I like to do to stay focused in an off season, and something I like to talk to my clients about, is breaking up the time into smaller intervals. So right now it's January 15th. I've been talking to a lot of clients, especially ones that struggle a little bit more with that, is what do you want to get out of the next 90 days? Because 90 days is about a quarter of the year. And if you break the year up into quarters, and if you think about all of the things that happen in a year, whether it's like vacations, events, times that we get sick, times that we have to take off for, traveling or resting just in general or whatever, like there's all these things that happen throughout the year that can maybe take us away a little bit from our goal, or distract us or slow us down. So really thinking about things in increments and thinking about all the time you have in this off season, however long it's supposed to be, think about it as if it's less time than it actually is. And that is kind of develops this like almost underdog mentality. Like, I don't have that much time. Like right now I'm in a health phase, and then I have this much time for a growth phase. And then realistically, I would have this much time between that and the next growth phase. And then all of a sudden, like it's the end of the year and I'm getting ready to start prep. That's how I look at my year right now personally. And so as an athlete, so I try to look at like, what do the next 90 days look like, or what could they look like on both the negative and the positive side, right? Because if you're still kind of reeling from the holidays and getting back on your feet and starting over and whatever, then, you might waste a good chunk of that 90 days just like getting back into it. But if you really focused on all of the next 90 days being like extremely intentional, then think about what you could look back on at day 90. Who do you want to be at the end of 90 days? And how can you make that person a reality? Because that person is only going to be a reality if you really do the actions that that person would do. So look at who you want to be one day in the future. Say you want to be an IFBB pro by the end of the year or next year or next national show you do, whenever that is, and you're in the off season on your way to that. Do what that person would do, because that person is not who you are now. You are who you are now. But there is a version of you that has achieved great things, but they've only achieved those things by doing things that you're not currently doing or you haven't done enough of. So do the things that you know you would have to do and work every day to make the next 90 days as powerful and as impactful as possible. And you're going to look back on that and learn from it and know like, all right, I stayed locked in for those 90 days. I could definitely do another 90 days. And then at the end of that, you're going to be like, oh, wow, that's half the year that just went by, right? So I try to look at things in smaller phases, hitting smaller milestones. Think too about like non-aesthetic goals. I think that helps for a lot of people, especially as you put on a little bit of body fat in an off season. It's necessary and it's part of growing muscle, part of eating more, part of eating a little bit more flexible. But focusing on how strong you feel, especially if you just went through a prep and you realize like how weak you got towards the end of prep and how weak you felt, how frail, fragile when you have some body fat in you, you're a lot stronger. When you have more muscle in you, you're stronger. When you have more food and fuel, you are stronger. So really be grateful and take specific intentional moments of gratitude to tell yourself like, I'm so happy that I can lift that weight, because I know if I were this lean, if I were that lean, I wouldn't be able to lift that weight. So taking moments of gratitude for just like what you get to do as a bodybuilder, that you get to train really hard right now, that you get to eat a lot of food, that you get to have some moments of flexibility and balance and things like that, if you really want them. And that can help you just be a little bit more proud and happy in the season you're in, instead of focusing on the future that you don't get to be in yet, or the past that you miss. Another thing is to stay active in the sport. So we just talked about this a little bit with Sheila Brown, promoter of the Texas Pro, Battle of Texas, and some other shows here in Texas and beyond, is staying active in the sport as a non-competitor. So me as a competitor and as a coach, I obviously as a coach, I'm living and breathing the sport all the time. But when I was not a coach and I was working a different type of job, was working in gym management when I first got my pro card. So I worked for a Gold's Gym franchisee, and I really wanted something to allow me to like stay tied to bodybuilding, because I saw myself and I saw the fact that, all right, I just got my pro card. I want to take a long off season, but I want to stay involved in the sport and I want to like grow with the sport in some way, maybe not as just a competitor. So I went to my local promoters that happened to go to the gym that I worked for, and I asked them if I could help them at their next show, which was Emerald Cup in Seattle, Washington, or in Bellevue, Washington. So I asked them and they accepted. They said, yeah, you can work kind of wherever we can put you. So they put me in various places. I did some expediting. I rode a freight elevator up and down with competitors. I helped with doors and tickets and cleanup and stuff like that. And I had so much fun because I had never been backstage for a reason other than being a competitor. I had never even really been to a show as a non-competitor at that point. So that really helped me just like connect to the sport in a new way. And it gave me a great perspective on what it takes to put on a show. Because as a competitor, you're really not focused on that. You're backstage, you're focusing on getting your meals done, getting your water in, listening to your coach, posing, pumping up, all the things. And then you get your trophy and you walk off stage and you're, focused on the post-show meal. You're not thinking about the production. And the production takes a lot. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of money. It is not something that makes a ton of money, especially in promoters, like initial years of promoting shows. They work really hard to get their show to a point where not only it's making them money and helping them make a living, but to a point where competitors really enjoy competing and they like it so much that they would either come back to the same show another time or come back to another show of theirs instead of a different promoters, or refer their friends to compete at that show and attend that show and stuff like that. So little things that promoters do, like the goodie bags in competitors, when competitors check in, on making the check-in experience fun and exciting and special, on making the show day special with like, Texas Pro has all sorts of like smokes and pyrotechnics and like fire and stuff like that on stage. And they have really amazing photographers and videographers covering the entire event on stage and off stage. So all of those things are something that they work really hard on. They work all year to make that happen for each show. So being a part of that in some way, whether you're expediting, you're doing tickets at the door, you're just helping out wherever you can. Now that I've been doing this for a long time and working for promoters for a while, I actually do the music for a lot of shows. So I'm doing like, anywhere from 10 to 15 shows a year where I'm doing the music for that show, and I get to see a lot of competitors. I also get to watch shows. I get to see what's being rewarded in shows and in different classes. So that helps my coaching business. So while it's time away from home and time traveling, I get to become better as a coach because of the fact that I go to a lot of shows. So staying active in the sport, you could also, as a female, you could be a trophy girl if you want. You could work for a company like a supplement company as an ambassador, work a show booth for the company you work for, that kind of thing. But also go to and attend posing clinics, like talk to other competitors, go to competitor type gyms and like go to events, network with other bodybuilders and make friends with other bodybuilders, because if you're going to continue in the sport is not just a one person sport. It is truly like a team and support oriented sport, because you can get so much out of the community of bodybuilding. Like I've met all of the most important people in my life through bodybuilding. Another thing is to learn from others. So learning from your coach, asking from your coach for full off-season coaching. I've unfortunately seen a lot of competitors realize that their coach kind of just falls off in the off season, and they go to kind of like a hands-off approach with their coach, or their coach goes with them. And while going to maybe fewer check-ins because there's fewer changes being made, that's a lot different and sometimes necessary. And I know a lot of great coaches who do that. But that versus just completely not checking in or just kind of giving you a cookie cutter program that everyone in the off season gets or every one of their competitors gets, and just kind of like only having an eye on like, yeah, bring your food up a little bit. Here's some less cardio, something like that. Your coach should be just as invested in you in the off season as they are in your prep, or as they are in competitors who are in prep. So that's one of the reasons why like I have the same pricing for my coaching off season versus prep, because they both come with the same amount of seriousness and the same amount of investment from me. Yes, it's a little different, right? In prep, we're checking in a little bit more often, and we're peaking, we're posing and things like that. But in off season, I might be spending more time on mindset and time on programming and making sure programming is on point, and reviewing videos and things like that. There, it all matters, and the off season matters just as much, if not more, than the prep, especially if you have big goals of winning an overall, of getting a pro card, of winning a pro show. So just learning from others, learning from your coach, asking your coach questions. That's a really important thing. And that's what I love about my athletes, is that they ask me a lot of questions. And I get to learn how to be a better coach by learning what answers and what style of coaching and what style of communication really helps people have those light bulb moments and really change their lives through changed behaviors, changed mindsets, and just working on who they are as a person in relation to their goals as bodybuilders. So learning from your coach, learning from posing coaches, making sure you're posing in the off season as well. More you pose in the off season, the better your posing conditioning is going to be in prep. So that's a really important part. And then I think the other stuff I was going to talk about was stuff I already talked about, is just getting your life right, your finances, your relationships, your career, your business, whatever it is. Just make sure your life is right before you like try to add bodybuilding to the mix. Because while there's no perfect time to prep or perfect time to focus on bodybuilding, you absolutely need to have like the basics covered, because bodybuilding is never going to pay your bills by itself. You have to be able to be a whole person and show up in the world, in society, in your relationships, in your life, in order to basically earn the privilege of competing as a bodybuilder. So those are my tips for keeping the fire lit in the off season. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have ideas for other kind of solo casts or things that I can talk through in terms of educating you on, or talking about different techniques that I use in coaching, mindset stuff, whatever it is, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear it.